I'm about to say some things that are going to probably piss a lot of people off and maybe get me canceled, but I don't care because it needs to be said. So buckle up. We're going to start off with an analogy, and then I'm going to circle back at the end of what I have to say, and everything will hopefully tie up nice and tidy and make sense. Here goes. So let's say you're on the Titanic and it hits an iceberg. There's a giant hole in that ship, and there's nothing that anybody can do to prevent that ship from sinking. Now, let's say you get two different people that react in two different ways. One goes out on the deck of the ship and starts flapping their arms, doing the chicken dance, howling at the moon, doing incantations, carrying on, and they're convinced that all of this noise and commotion that they're making is going to stop the ship from sinking. And then you've got another type of person who's just like, we got to get people to lifeboats, we got to get people to safety, we got to save as many lives as we can, got to get off of this ship, it's sinking. There's nothing I can do about this sinking ship, but maybe I can give up my own seat in a lifeboat to save somebody else's life. Now, the first type of person is not only going around causing all this commotion in a futile effort to stop a sinking ship from going down, he's also going around yelling and screaming at everybody else who's trying to get people on lifeboats saying, you're doing it wrong. You're the problem. You're causing this ship to sink. Now, I know that's a pretty extreme example, but in this scenario, which person would you want to be? Like I said, we're going to circle back to that in just a minute. First, we're going to change gears. Let me tell you about my love-hate relationship with Michael Moore. What I love about Michael Moore is that he believes very strongly and passionately about causes and ideas that I also believe in and agree with. But what I hate about Michael Moore is that the way that he goes about advocating for these causes is through deception and lies and misinformation and twisting the truth to just try and make his argument, our argument, a little bit better. And I hate that because it leaves my side of the argument vulnerable to all kinds of attacks, and it destroys the credibility of my side of the argument. I have come to loathe the documentary film format, mainly because it is such an effective tool for deceiving people. There are great documentaries out there, don't get me wrong, but the way the format presents itself, it encourages the viewer to just accept what's being told, the narrative that's being presented, and then just shut their brains off and do no further research because all the experts and everything you need to know has been presented right there in the documentary. Two examples that come to mind recently, Plandemic and What the Bleep Do We Know? Total hogwash presented as a serious intellectual documentary film. But social media is even more insidious, and here's why. When people are consuming social media, they are in a position where they're just in a hurry. They're taking a fire hose of information and they're consuming the social media from people who they align their values with. And so therefore they trust to always be telling them the truth and giving them the straight story. So social media is such a highly effective tool for propaganda and misinformation. And what's worse is when it comes from people whose positions I agree with. Which is why when I started seeing videos like the one I'm about to show you pop up, I was just horribly disappointed and saddened by what I was seeing. Now, don't at this creator or bother them or anything like that. I'm not calling them out personally, and I know nothing about their heart or motivations. From my experience with them, they're a very good person. They're an extremely intelligent person, and they always mean best by what they do. I'm just using this as an example of something that I've noticed happening, which is extremely disturbing.
Pay close attention to how the media has framed this. You'll see many headlines from reputable news sources that are talking about it, but not at the same time. Saying what he did, but they're not saying why. They're not saying Gaza, they're not saying Palestine, they're not saying genocide.
All right, so did you catch that? He said they're not saying Gaza, they're not saying Palestine, they're not saying genocide. But the thing is that's just not true. And the first thing that made me suspicious was that first article that he put up there, that New York Times headline, because it's clearly cut off in a very specific way to withhold information from the viewer. Unfortunately, that specific headline, that specific article has been changed since it originally was published because what he was showing was a publishing of a breaking news, developing news story. And it's been updated since then. So the best you can find online on the New York Times website is this when you do a search. What you're going to see here is that the print article, look at what the headline is for the print article that was printed in the New York Times. That doesn't look to me like the New York Times is trying to hide or obfuscate what the person's purposes were. And then if you actually go into the article itself and read what was actually said in the article, it mentions Gaza. It mentions what his purpose was and why it was protest. They're not hiding anything. He gave another example from Reuters, and if you just look at the first paragraph of that article, it mentions the very thing he says they're not talking about. The same thing goes if you look at the Washington Post article and the CNN article. Both of those articles, by the second paragraph, go into and mention exactly why Aaron Bushnell did what he did. So I just wonder, why are people playing so cute with this dispensing of information, going around saying, oh, the media is not telling you why this happened? And they're using carefully edited and cropped headlines in order to support this point, when whoever's originating these things know what these articles say. They have to have read these articles. They're lying. And then they've got an army of people who are not lying, who are just repeating the information and regurgitating what they hear, thinking that there's some kind of media cover-up. And what's worse is that damages the credibility of every single person putting this message out. I love this creator that I used as an example. I love all the information I get from him. But now I have to question, like, how careful is he in the information that he curates for me? How careful is he in his research? And how willing is he to bend the truth in order to fit the narrative that he wants to promote? I don't know. His credibility is now permanently damaged in my eyes. And that makes me really mad, because I love the kind of content that he puts out. And I love the things that he stands for. And I want to also support and promote that. But now I have to think, can I? Can I even trust anything he or anybody else who's putting out these messages say? And the thing that frustrates me most about this, and we're going to start circling back into that original analogy pretty soon here, is that everyone keeps wanting to talk about what Aaron Bushnell's motivations for self-immolation were. And they want to frame it as in, like, oh, it was because of the war in Gaza, and he's trying to prevent and stop the war in Gaza, which is true, but it's not the heart of the issue. Because what's the very first thing that Aaron Bushnell said? He said, I will no longer be complicit in a genocide. And if you just stop and think about that for a minute, that means that Aaron Bushnell felt so desperate and so useless that he had no other choice but to light himself on fire. Otherwise, he was complacent in a genocide. Now, who made him feel that way? Because the fact of the matter is, you can be an activist for a cause and not be complacent. There are many ways that you can do that without having to light yourself on fire. And yet Aaron Bushnell was driven to think that that was his only remaining option in life. I don't think of this as a suicide. I don't think of this as a mental health crisis. I think of this as the inevitable conclusion, the inevitable end point of a type of activism that is about making a lot of noise, about making no real meaningful change, and is ultimately going to leave everyone feeling hopeless and desperate. That's right. There is a type of activism out there that drove Aaron Bushnell to this point of hopelessness and desperation, where he felt that the only way he could do something meaningful was to end his life in an act of political protest, a horrific act at that. So ultimately, I don't lay this at the feet of the Titanic, the ship that's going down. I lay this at the feet of the people who are on the deck of the ship making noise and trying to make everyone else feel like they are responsible for the ship going down if they don't start doing exactly what they're doing. There's this brand of let's make the most noise activism out there that has got to stop. It's futile. It doesn't actually accomplish anything except make a lot of noise. Its only thing that it really accomplishes is it starts an arms race of who can make the most noise and do the most extreme act to show their dedication to the cause. And so when you live in a world where everyone is going around saying, if you are not at my level of noise making and extremism, if you're not at my level, if you're anywhere below me, I'm going to judge you. I'm going to make you feel like you're part of the problem, that you're complicit, that you're complacent. Unless you reach or exceed my level of noise making, you're just going to get a lot more Aaron Bushnells. And here's the tragic thing about that. People are going around trying to make it like he's some kind of hero, like he's accomplishing something. But did you know in the history of self-immolation, which has been going on for centuries, by the way, not one single meaningful change in the history of the world has ever come about through self-immolation. People self-immolated during the Vietnam War. Guess what? It didn't stop the Vietnam War. People in Eastern Europe self-immolated to protest the USSR. Guess what? It never brought about the collapse of the USSR. Something else did that. When Alan Bruce self-immolated in 2022 on Earth Day on the steps of the US Supreme Court to protest climate change. And guess what? You're just hearing of him now, probably, because that's how effective his act was at bringing about change in the world. Nobody even heard about it. I'm not trying to disrespect or disparage the dead because, like I said, I lay this feeling of hopelessness and desperation at the feet of the people who put the idea in those people's heads. Now, throughout history, oftentimes the feelings of helplessness and desperation has come through the hands of the oppressor. But how messed up is it that today we live in a world where that feeling is generally coming through the voices and the mouths of the very activists who are on the side of the cause, who are being oppressed or trying to support the oppressed. So all of this talk about the reason that he did it has been completely missing the entire issue. The reason he did it is because of people, maybe like you, who made him to feel like the only way he could be an effective, non-complicit activist was by lighting himself on fire, because you raised the bar of necessity to prove your dedication to the cause that high. And guess what? It's going to keep happening, and it's not going to change a thing. Now, I talked about how self-immolation has never brought about social change. Guess what else has never brought about meaningful social change? Division and subtraction. The other thing that I noticed coming from these same people who are elevating this message of activism, noisy activism for the sake of noisy activism, and applying purity tests to everybody else who isn't doing things the exact same way that they think they should be done, which, by the way, is a trait of narcissism. No meaningful social change in the history of the world has ever been brought about by a movement that first started subtracting from its numbers and dividing its people. All meaningful social change in all history has come about by people who don't necessarily see eye to eye on everything, finding common ground in ways that they can get together and work together to achieve a common purpose. The people who are going around getting angry at and being judgmental of and disowning, blocking, whatever it is, anybody who doesn't come to the exact same conclusion of like, this is the way we need to bring about social change. Talking about people who agree with every single thing that you may be saying, except they don't come to the same conclusion about what the best way to go about promoting that cause is. Using that as a litmus test about who you're going to associate with is completely futile. It's a self-defeating effort. So here you have somebody saying, oh, I'm so passionate about this cause. I want to do anything to bring about meaningful change in the world. And the very first thing you do is create division and subtraction, therefore putting yourself on an island where you've basically rendered yourself completely ineffective and completely unable of actually bringing about meaningful social change. How stupid is that? I'm sorry, I don't mean to be harsh because I think this is very intelligent people who are doing this. I think ultimately it comes down to being naive. And on the subject of being naive, let me just say, one trend that I've noticed among a lot of people that are doing this, that are engaging in this noise-only activism, is that it seems like they're just waking up to just how horrible the world is. But it's been like this all along. Where were you? Where was your voice when the Rohingya were being ethnically cleansed in Myanmar? Where was your never-ending stream of videos and activism about the Uyghur people? 30,000+ dead in Palestine. That's horrific. But you know what's 10 times more horrific? The number who have been dying in Darfur over the last decade and a half. And I don't remember you completely putting your life on hold for that. There's a crisis going on in the Democratic Republic of Congo right now that dates back to the 90s, coming out of the Rwandan genocide, that never really stopped. It just moved across the border. This has been going on for years. Where were you? And honestly, where were you in 2007 when I sat down with my Air Force commander and told him I could not in good conscience re-enlist in the military now that I knew how destructive and harmful the U.S. foreign policy was? Where were you in 2008 when I hooked up with the Ron Paul campaign for no other reason than the fact that Ron Paul was the only person running for president in 2008 who was willing to call out Israel for being an apartheid state and willing to name the ethnic cleansing that was happening there and call out the U.S. for supporting this disastrous foreign policy? Where were you? Here's the thing. I don't judge you for not knowing that the world was going to hell in a handbasket your entire life and long before you were born, that none of this is new. I don't really judge you for that. But I would just ask that you stop naively judging other people who are not just waking up and realizing how horrible the world is, and we've known for years and years and decades of our life, and we figured out a new way of approaching and adjusting to it and trying to be effective in our activism. Just take a step back and learn from other people for a second. Instead of arrogantly thinking that you've got it all figured out, you've got all the answers. Learn how to hold competing ideas in your head, two different ideas at the same time. Learn how to see the world for the gray that it is, instead of insisting on everything be painted black and white. So you know how you don't get that feeling of hopelessness and desperation that Aaron Bushnell had? Here's how you don't get it. You don't get it by insisting that you can stop the Titanic from sinking if you just try hard enough. A big part of life is about just understanding our limitations and coming to grips with the fact that many things are way out of our control. And this is not a defeatist attitude. Far from it. It's quite the opposite. Because once we realize and come to grips with what is in our control, that's when we're able to really truly understand what we can do to be the most effective at bringing about positive change in the world. Once we take our eye and our goal off of stopping ships from sinking that are going to be at the bottom of the ocean in a few hours, once we stop dreaming that ridiculous dream and start thinking, who can I get in a lifeboat? Who in my life can I connect with and influence? That's when you realize your true power. And that's when you don't have to feel hopeless and desperate anymore. That's when you can feel empowered, because you can actually start to bring about meaningful change that is within the realm of your control. And it starts with not blocking and disowning people who don't see eye to eye with you. They're within the realm of your influence. Treating people like garbage and writing them off and telling them that they're part of the problem, that's within your control. What Benjamin Netanyahu decides to pursue as a policy in order to keep himself in power so that he doesn't go to jail when he loses his prime ministership, that's not in your control. That's not in anyone's control. That's not even in Joe Biden's control, to be honest with you. While it's okay to form and have opinions about these things, if you make that the sole focus of your activism, you are missing the ball, man. You are the reason Aaron Bushnell self-immolated. Once you start looking outside of yourself at all these things that are way outside of your control and start looking inward, you might start to have some startling realizations. I've seen people disown friends of many years for questioning the wisdom of accelerationism, while meanwhile they have tens of thousands of dollars worth of plastic toys holed up in their basement, toys that they could sell and turn into cash and literally save people's lives with. That kind of hypocrisy is what results from the type of activism that is all about making the most noise and not about accepting the things we can and can't change and focusing our energy and efforts into those that we can, even if they seem small in the grand scheme of things. So I don't have anything against Aaron Bushnell, and I totally actually understand why he did what he did. I felt that feeling that he's felt. But don't go around acting like he's some kind of hero, because he's not. He did something that made a lot of noise and will bring about zero change in this world. And it's not his fault that he thought that that was the only thing he could do. If you're engaged in this hypocritical, futile, division and subtraction, noise activism movement, judging others who don't live up to your standards, making everybody else feel complicit if they aren't making more noise as you, it's your fault. I lay this at your feet.